Well, good news, EU fans. Some of the players are actually staying in EU. Splyce looking like they've got their finalized roster. You're looking at Odoamne in the top lane. Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Xerxe coming over in the jungle. Xerxe in the mid lane, who had a pretty impressive performance in NA. Someone from NA actually going to EU, even though he's from EU.
Yeah,
It's a little bit back and forth. And then Kabi, the only returning Splyce member on the roster, joined by Kasing in the bottom lane. And overall, that's definitely an improvement, I'd say, on the Splyce squad from last year.
Yeah, the old Splyce team finally deciding to part ways after spending a long time together with mediocre results. Obviously, last year was probably their best one, pushing G2 to 5 games in the quarterfinal set. But now it's a brand new roster, other than Kabi staying at AD carry, and it looks a lot better. There's almost upgrades at every position, I would say. Obviously, Xerxe is a guy who's been rookie of the split before. Odoamne, the best, or at least one of the best top laners in Europe. So, I mean, this new roster looks really good. It's going to be interesting to see how they all mesh together. Obviously, with 5 guys who haven't played with each other before, probably going to take some time, but talent-wise, they're definitely up there in the top tier. We don't have a lot of finalized EU rosters yet. There's a couple along with Misfits and Schalke, but so far, that looks like a pretty good roster, and it'll be interesting to see how they can compete with some of the other teams. Maybe G2 takes a step back now, based on the roster they put together thus far. But for Splyce, I mean, this sets them up for a pretty good result, I think, so far in spring.
Yeah, I think the main question mark for me is just Kasing, because he hasn't been in the LCS in like over a year. I mean, that Red Bulls team he was playing on, he was far and away the captain because there was a lot of inexperienced guys on that challenger squad. So we'll see if he's still ready to play at an LCS level. But I mean, at times we saw he was one of the best support players in EU, and he was basically a meme. Anytime Hjarnan looked great, all he said was cussing after anything. So maybe he gets back to that form. I mean, Mickey was a guy who was really solid on Splyce. So that's really the only hesitation I have about this roster. Outside of that, yeah, it's pretty much an upgrade or staying even in terms of Kabi, because he's the same person. Outside of that, I mean, it's probably an upgrade in the other 3 positions. So pretty good job from Splyce.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Kasing. It was kind of surprising when he dropped off the face of the EU LCS and wasn't on a roster, because he was one of the top 3 supports in Europe at one point in time. And then, I mean, the only other question might be Xerxe, because we haven't really seen that much of him. Obviously, he played less than a full split with Envy, but when he came in, that team definitely looked a lot better than they did with Pyrian, than with Ninja. And I think he showed quite a bit. The potential to carry by Xerxe is definitely there, and he's still a younger guy with limited LCS experience. So given more time, he could probably outperform Senkux, but I mean, Senkux was also kind of a rock in that mid lane too. So we'll have to see how Xerxe can do in a full split with Splyce. But yeah, I like this roster, and who knows what they can do.
And Xerxe did steal some Rookie of the Split votes from Mike Young. So, you know, anyone who can do that, you got to give him a bit of a round of applause for that.
For sure.
See what he's like back in EU. You mentioned G2. Listen, people have really been hyping up this roster, mainly people from G2, which is kind of their job. Perks said this roster is stacked. So right now, Perks already had his bottom lane with Hjarnan and Wadded coming in. Okay, I mean, they were the strong point on a kind of struggling Roccat team last year. And now it's looking like it's going to be Wunder in the top lane from Splyce, obviously. And there were even rumors of potentially Trashy heading in there. So you're having Splyce guys come over to G2. If that's the finalized roster for G2, I mean, based on the full rosters we've seen already, I think most of them are better than that G2 one.
Yeah, I mean, those guys would be Splyce roster, Schalke's roster, and the Misfits roster. All right now, at least, look better than that new G2 team with Wunder in the top lane. I mean, you're losing, obviously, huge pieces in Sven and Mithy, and no matter who you sign in Europe, it's going to be a downgrade. Hjarnan and Wadded are definitely a downgrade to Sven and Mithy. And then, I mean, expect Wunder might be on the same level, probably the same level or even, but it's just interesting to see G2 signing guys that come from middle-of-the-road teams like the Wunder, like Hjarnan and Wadded. So, I mean, Wunder's been a good player, and he's been pretty talented for Splyce in that top lane, but I just don't know if this team is enough. You bring in all these kind of middle-of-the-road guys in their position, and I don't love the roster that much, because they had Odoamne on the table, Yanko's on the table. Everyone thought that was going to be a thing where the whole G2K mismatch roster comes together, and instead it looks like a bit of Splyce, a bit of Rocket, and Perks.
Yeah, and I think if something like this is the fully finalized roster, it's putting so much pressure on Perks because things like this Rocket bottom lane, someone like Wunder, who did have some pretty great games for Splyce and was pretty consistently good for it. So I'm not too upset about that signing, but I mean, what all these moves are saying, it's like, well, imagine these other guys playing with someone as dominant as Perks. They haven't done that on their other teams. But if you're saying that from every lane, then Perks is going to have to really pop off and be just completely carrying a lot of these games, or at least putting so much pressure that it takes all the other pressure off these other lanes. So it's going to be a lot of pressure on Perks in this upcoming split, especially when so many of the other top-tier mid laners in EU are gone. People are just going to be expecting him to be destroying every game in the EU LCS, which is a little unfair.
It's definitely a little unfair, and we don't know who the jungler is on G2 yet. Obviously, there's a couple of options out there. Yankos, Svenskeren, Trashy potentially. So there's some okay guys out there that G2 can look at, but if they don't get that top-tier guy, then, like you said, it's Perks who's going to have to carry the load of this team, and it might be a bit too much for him to have to do game in, game out.
Yeah, and I think if they get someone like Trashy, then that's only going to be more so. At least someone like Svenskeren or Yankos can be these kind of aggressive guys, and you can kind of completely play through them. Trashy, not so much, but we'll see what this G2 roster finally ends up being. But as for right now, I don't think it looks like an upper echelon EU team like people were maybe expecting to see them kind of roll through and win yet another LCS split.
No, and that's because you look at some of these other teams, like Splyce, like Schalke, like Misfits, and there's some new contenders that are going to be pushing G2 for that top spot. And there's also a bunch of teams that haven't even been finalized yet. Some teams that don't look good on paper either, like the Unicorns, which is now an empty roster. Vitality needs to fill some spots. So a lot of work to be done still in the EU.
A lot of work to be done, and there's still so many question marks, and a lot of people concerned about, everyone leaving EU, not much interest in EU, but I mean, right now, pretty hard to pick a favorite. Maybe you got to go with Fnatic just because they have the same roster, but maybe, just maybe, the EU LCS will be more interesting than we're expecting.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more esports content.